Hey everybody, this is Mr. Chernetsky, and this is Probability and Statistics, Unit 1, Lesson 1. Gathering data. So in statistics, the first thing that we want to do is we want to gather data, and there are three different ways that we can do that. The first method is an observational study. What that means is we're trying to find out information about the entire population, and so we go out and we just observe. We gather very passively, collect data from a sample of that population, and we can do that just by observing, or we can ask the volunteer or the sample members to take a survey. But we are not changing the environment in which the population, we're not interacting with them in any sort of way other than collecting the data. So the observational study is passively gathering data from a sample of our population. An experiment. This is where we're actually actively engaging in our subjects. We are changing the environment, usually with a control that isn't changed, and we're observing the effects. So this example here is just experimenting. Our subjects here are pieces of bread and being touched with different things. You could be looking at a drug test. You could be giving a new experimental drug or trial drug and seeing how it affects your subjects. So that's another example of an experiment. But here we're actually experimenting. We are actually interacting with our subjects. So that's why it's different than just an observational study, which is just passive. So an experiment is actually actively engaging with your subjects to gather information. I shouldn't say subject, say sample. Okay. And then we have a simulation. So simulation is where we kind of create either a computer or a probability of an event occurring, and we just run it through a computer, or we just simulate it through probability, and we observe the results, but it's not a real situation. It's all a virtual simulation. So simulation is a virtual experiment with made-up subjects. Okay. In order to use statistics, any of this data that we're getting, there's a few things that have to be done. We have to clearly define the population. So that's who are we studying? We have to clearly define what is being measured. So what are we studying? Clearly define how the sample members were selected. So how did you, if we're taking a survey, how did you select these people in your survey? Use samples that represent the entire population, and we want to avoid bias at all times. Okay, let's talk about some bias, for example, in sampling. So, errors in sampling, a biased design. So this question, this survey question, is essentially a biased question because we essentially have three positive answers here and one kind of neutral answer. So this one doesn't really even have a negative response that's even possible. And so sometimes this is done by accident, sometimes it's done on purpose. So this is why it's important to identify the method and how you are asking questions or how the sample was taken. Because you can get poor results if your questions are biased. So this would be, bias design would be biased or unbalanced survey questions. They're designed to get a certain result or biased to get a certain result. Okay. Convenience sample. Convenience sample means that you go out and you only sample the people that are easiest to get to. Okay, the closest. That's why we call it convenience. The most convenient people. So it could be like the first 50 people you run into. It could be only your closest neighbors. First people you run into at the mall. Whatever the case may be. And it causes problems because you're going to get a bias because depending on what time of day you sample, you're going to get different type of people who are not in your survey or in your observation. You're only going to get information about these people who are close to you, and you're not going to get any information about people who are not in this close-knit group. So that's another form of bias. So only testing the people close to you. The closest subjects. All right, voluntary response. So voluntary response would be something like Yelp or a customer review on Amazon. You basically put something out there and you're just hoping that people will respond, but it's completely voluntary. The problem with voluntary response is that you generally only get two types of people who are willing to do it: those who are very, very, very satisfied, and those people who are not satisfied. So people who have something to complain about, and people who just are through the over the moon over stuff. You're not going to get any sort of response about people who are just okay with with what's going on. So not the most reliable type of thing. Very convenient to do because you don't have to do any work. You just put it out there, and people will, fill it out on their own time. But it's very unlikely that you're going to get very good results from that. So, voluntary response is the subject's response is voluntary, and the problem is that leads to highly polarized results. Okay, undercoverage. If I'm wanting to know about how people are using a certain app, and so I go and I survey all the people who use this app on iPhones, well, I've got a problem here because I'm only getting data from the type of people who have iPhones. I don't have any data from people who have a Galaxy or some sort of Samsung or whatever type of other phone they might have. Okay, so I'm not getting the full story here. So you have to be careful about the method that you use. So undercoverage happens when the method of data collection leaves out a demographic of people. Okay. Non-response. So this happens when we are sending out a survey and we don't get a response back. So, or we ask people, to fill it out and they leave questions blank. So, they may, just because people don't want to answer, doesn't mean that they don't have information that we're curious about. So this is not responding to the survey, and we might still want information about them. Good way to reduce non-response is to make sure that your survey is that they feel comfortable it's going to be anonymous. Same thing with response bias. If we actually do get people to respond, if they're in a certain situation where they might be pressured socially to answer one way or another, you might get a bias. So an example I could think of is, let's suppose you're surveying people at a Broncos game and you're asking about another football team or something like that, or how they feel about the Broncos maybe. If you weren't actually at that game, you might get a different response because some people are sitting there and they've got, we've got all the fans there. They're going to feel pressure to answer a certain way. So again, having anonymity is another good way to avoid response bias. So this is people answering survey with a bias, with biased answers. Okay, So now we know the type of errors we're trying to avoid. There are three types of sampling that we are looking at. Three ways that we can actually go about collecting. The first type is known as a simple random sample. So simple random sample, or SRS, basically you can think of it as kind of like pulling numbers out of a hat. Okay, so ideally you have, if we were at Bronco Stadium and we were just surveying people, we would take everybody who's here, assign them a number, and then randomly pick out numbers. So we'd get random number, random people all over the place. So there's those purely random collection. So you can think of it again like picking numbers from a hat. Purely random selection. So next we have a stratified random sample. So this one's a little bit more organized, but still semi-random. So instead of everybody in the stadium getting equal, choice, a stratified random sample says that we go in each section, and then we do our pull our numbers from a hat. So in this section here, we pick one person. In this section, we randomly pick one person. In this section, we randomly pick one person. And we do that for every section. And that sort of allows us to make sure that we are getting essentially everybody in every part of the stadium, for example. So we're not leaving, if we did a simple random sample, there's a chance that we could leave some people out. So we're going to try and make sure we get every single person, or every single type of demographic of person. So picking randomly from every section, and these sections don't have to actually be physical sections. Actually call those strata. And the last one, cluster sampling. I don't want. Let's say I don't want to go all the way everywhere in the stadium. I just want to make sure I get people from the top, people from the middle, and people from the bottom. So, and what I do is I take a cluster here, I take a cluster in the middle, and I take a cluster from the top. These are still randomly selected from the sections, but we don't need to go all the way around if we figure that, well, it's this lower section is going to be the same as all this other lower section, and this medium section is going to be the same all the way around. So this is picking a cluster of subjects from key sections. Okay, well, that's the end of this video.